page, any page, of the Air Force Scrapbook, 50 years to the day the United States Air Force was founded, and you find tradition and complacency the real enemies, vision and dedication the real heroes. August 1st, 1907, Washington, D.C., almost 4 years after Kitty Hawk. The Chief Signal Officer, United States Army, issues a document.
An aeronautical division of this office is hereby established to take effect this date. This division will have charge of all matters pertaining to military ballooning, air machines, and all kindred subjects.
This simple office memo gave birth to today's United States Air Force. The first commander, Captain Charles DeForest Chandler. The first staff, Corporal Edward Ward and First Class Private Joseph E. Barrett. In short order, Private Barrett went over the hill, and the Army's new air arm lost half its enlisted strength. Just a year later, in August 1908, the Wright brothers brought their $25,000 skid-mounted pusher to Fort Myer, Virginia, near Washington. Thousands witnessed the military test flights. Aviation came to the people, an important step. And then, after only 2 weeks, disaster. Pilot Orville Wright escaped with injuries. His passenger, Lieutenant Thomas E. Selfridge, the first military man to solo, was killed. Next year, the Wrights returned to Fort Myer with an improved version of their flying machine. Orville Wright, with Lieutenant Frank Lahm as passenger, completed the first official military test flight of 1 hour and 12 minutes. Then, with Lieutenant Benjamin F. Falloy as passenger, he passed the final test, a 10-mile speed run. Average speed, 42 1/2 miles per hour. The Wright brothers began to train Army pilots at College Park, Maryland. Lieutenant Lahm and Lieutenant Frederick E. Humphreys, each with 3 hours flying time, were the first to solo in a military plane. By 1910, because of crashes and reassignments, the Army had neither a usable plane nor a qualified pilot. By 1914, the nation had only 14 licensed Army pilots, and 8 of them were killed in crashes that year alone. Army leaders were shocked. They debated, should they finally call a halt to military aviation? And then a step forward. The treacherous pusher-type machines were condemned and tractor biplanes adopted. Best remembered is the Curtiss Jenny. In 1916, on the Mexican border, we got our first taste of aerial combat, and only a taste. After a month, all 8 planes in the engagement were washed out. This stimulated public concern and official action. But the damage had been done. The United States had lost the aviation leadership inherited from the Wright brothers. When we entered the Great War in 1917, the United States ranked 7th among the nations in air power. Practically overnight, thousands were in uniform and preparing to go overseas. Ground warfare was the order of the day. In France, our airmen flew French and British planes because they were better combat ships than America could provide. The first Americans to join the air battle were volunteers in the French Lafayette Escadrille. Soon our own squadrons went into action. Before it was over, 71 Americans had racked up 5 or more kills in the air to qualify as aces. America's ace of aces with 26 kills was Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. Thus began the long struggle for command of the air. A struggle of conviction that air must be dominated before surface action can be successful. A struggle of air power and fighter pilot demonstrations spanning 3 wars by the Flying Tigers early in World War II. enough to protect the big birds on their bombing missions and clear the air for surface invasion. In the Southwest Pacific, the fast-moving campaign against Japanese fighters. There, America's all-time ace of aces, Major Dick Bong, racked up 40 aerial victories before his death on a test flight. In Korea, history's first jet aces commanded the air over MiG-Alley. The leading jet ace, Captain Joe McConnell, with 16 victories, was killed like Bong while testing a new aircraft. Top living American ace of all wars is Colonel Francis Gabreski with 37 1/2 aerial victories, 31 over Europe in World War II, and 6 1/2 jet kills in Korea. As the struggle for command of the air continues, the action takes place for the first time in history over our own backyard. Gone are the ocean barriers. Only constant patrol of the air ocean with electronic assist can hope to give us warning of invasion from the sky. Short warning indeed, too short for comfort. Only the power to strike back through the air can hope to provide security. For the vision and the deeds behind deterrent air power, the pages of the scrapbook turn back to the First World War. In 1917, the Strategical Aviation Branch of our Air Service in France advanced a plan for round-the-clock saturation attacks against enemy defenses and production facilities. Brigadier General William Mitchell laid it on the line. He urged
large aeronautical groups for strategical operations against enemy aircraft and materiel at a distance from the actual line. The bombardment and pursuit formations making up this force would have an independent mission and would be used to carry the war well into the enemy's country.
On September 13, 1918, Billy Mitchell launched the largest air offensive of the war, some 1,500 Allied planes in the San Miguel assault. Not a major effort by modern standards, but the vision of strategic air power was taking root. Shortly thereafter, Germany surrendered and World War I drew to a close. The Air Service was left with flying equipment which had been obsolete before the war began. But the air power vision was growing. Then came the bombing tests of the early 20s. The German battleship Ostfriesland and the American battleships New Jersey and Alabama all were sunk by land-based bombers. Their status accorded the Air Service. Drastic military reorganization became Mitchell's theme. When it didn't come, he exploded like a bomb on a battleship. His court-martial and its aftermath called national attention to the problem. The followers of Billy Mitchell saw land-based air power as an independent strategic force, a prime instrument of national policy. This was the vision that grew into a concept without the tools to do the job or to prove the point. The Condor, perhaps the best bomber of the 20s, had less than a 300-mile radius of action. The experimental Barling bomber of 1923 didn't have enough power to fly over the Appalachians from Dayton to Washington. And then Jimmy Doolittle's blind flight opened the door to all-weather flying and to a new era in aviation. By 1935, there was hope that equipment might catch up to concept. With the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, the United States assumed leadership in long-range bomber. December 7th, 1941. We had too little of everything. Said General Hap Arnold, wartime commander-in-chief,
"We are faced with a tough job, but I know that we can do it. And with all due reverence, I say, by God, we will do it."
As World War II engulfed Europe, the United States was sixth among the nations in air strength. Now we were rushing to catch up. Our first air attack on the enemy's homeland was a B-25 raid on Tokyo from a carrier deck. Although strategic in nature, it was more a warning of things to come. The new kind of war had its birth on August 17, 1942, when 12 B-17s of the 97th Bomb Group based in England bombed the rail marshalling yards at Rouen, France. As industry and training centers poured out men and equipment, our bomber attacks over Europe mounted in size and depth of penetration. Daylight precision bombing was severely tested. At times, its future seemed doubtful.
One to remember was the mission against the Ploesti oil fields on August 13, 1943. They were waiting for us on that one. Ploesti grew into a campaign. If we were overconfident about our bombing capability, we lost it at Ploesti. But the real crisis was yet to come. Schweinfurt and Regensburg, a twin mission that same month. Bombers lost. October 1943. Schweinfurt again. "62 bombers lost. Getting rough. We couldn't take it like that for long.
Then we got fighter escort to target and tightened up our bomber defenses. We began whittling down targets and fighters. By D-Day, Normandy, the skies over Europe were ours. They remained ours through the final push into Berlin. Across the world, our air forces were fighting their own kind of war.
It began to the beat of native tom-toms and ended with the greatest explosion in history. It was a back alley kind of war, barroom style, no holds barred. Low-level war, right on the deck. Against Jap shipping. Jap ground installations against Japan. An island-hopping war to advance the bomber line, retake the Philippines, Okinawa, Guam, and more islands than we could count. The air power concept got a shot in the arm when the B-29 went into action. Bigger, faster, and more effective than the B-17, it laid siege to Japan. Finally, no surface invasion, no need for one. Japan was taken without a foot being laid on her shores. The strategic concept of air power had been proved with lives to spare.
After molding the greatest Air Force the world has ever known, we saw our powerhouse fall apart with explosive demobilization in 1945. Within a relatively few months, the Air Force was reduced from 243 combat groups to the equivalent of 2 combat groups. We have fought one, really 2 wars since the global job. The mess in Korea called for tactical weapons. All available strategic targets were eliminated within a month. At home, as a deterrent to global attacks, was our B-36, the first intercontinental bomber. That it has never seen combat is the best measure of its effectiveness. The second war after VJ Day was a battle of supply, but war just the same. The Berlin airlift brought to mind the major role air transport had played throughout World War II. The ferrying operations, movement of troops, hauling critical supplies around the globe, flying the hump, and the contributions of our commercial airlines. And the Berlin airlift also brings back memories of earlier days, of peacetime activity over the years which has had a direct impact on the public. In 1918, when our pilots and planes inaugurated airmail service. Forest Fire Patrol in 1919. Dropping food and supplies to snowbound Navajos in the early 20s. Bombing an Hawaiian volcano to divert lava flow from populated areas in 35. And since World War II, evacuation of injured from the Texas City disaster. Operation Haylift to snowbound farmlands of the Midwest. Evacuation of sick and wounded from Dien Bien Phu in Indochina. And the more recent aerial movement of more than 10,000 Hungarian refugees to the United States. Nor can we forget the Air Force's most ill-fated peacetime assignment, carrying the mail in 1934. 9 pilots lost in the first 3 weeks of operation. Public opinion shifted from anger to concern about our inadequate training and equipment. Public opinion shifting too late. 9 more lives sacrificed on the altar of public complacency. So many American lives sacrificed on that same altar. In his last public statement at the Air Force Association Convention in 1951, General Hoyt S. Vandenberg said,
"The United States is no frail reed to be bent to the ground by a single blast. But if we doze, if, in our complacency, we forget the deadly earnestness of the enemy, his ever-increasing technical competence and undoubted ability to deliver his new weapons, then, I say, our strength will not avail us."
No single flight has served to advance public understanding of the air age quite as much as the historic crossing of the Atlantic in 1927 by Charles A. Lindbergh, who learned to fly with the Air Corps. The Air Force Scrapbook also documents the first non-stop cross-country flight by Lieutenants Oakley G. Kelly and John A. McCready in 1923. The first coast-to-coast, dawn-to-dusk hop by Lieutenant Russell L. Maughan in 1924. That same year, Lieutenants Eric Nelson and Lowell Smith piloted 2 Douglas World Cruisers 26,000 miles in 175 days on the first round-the-world flight in history. A third cruiser, after completing part of the trip, returned with them to the starting point at Seattle. 25 years later, in 1949, the B-50 Lucky Lady, commanded by Captain James Gallagher, circled the globe non-stop in 94 hours. In January 1957, 3 B-52s, commanded by Major General Archie Olds, did the same job in less than half the time. These globe-circling non-stop flights were made possible by aerial refueling. Aerial refueling for global operations was foreshadowed in 1929 by the Question Mark, piloted by Major Carl Spotts and Captain Ira Aker. Which stayed aloft for more than 150 hours. Today, as the key to modern deterrent forces, in-flight refueling takes place day in, day out, around the clock, on the average of 1 refueling every 3.5 minutes. As the Air Force, on its golden anniversary, maintains deterrent power for the free world, culminating the vision of its pioneers, new front lines appear, front lines of the technological war. We are entrenched on these lines, seeking intercontinental striking range at hypersonic speed, with thermonuclear power at the end of the line. In 1947, the rocket-powered XS-1, with Captain Charles Yeager at the controls, became the first plane to break through the sound barrier as a prelude to operational supersonic aircraft. We now have such planes on hand, including the first supersonic bomber. The X-2 research plane has more than tripled the speed of sound to pierce the thermal barrier, has climbed above 100,000 feet. Revolutionary type aircraft are being developed. The missile program steadily absorbs more time, effort, money, and plant facility. But with all this, it is well to remember that we had to borrow the Whittle engine from the British to introduce jet aviation in America. That Germany in World War II fired operational missiles we were still dreaming about. That Russia is embarked on a vast crusade to gain technological superiority over the Western world and is gaining steadily in the race. And now, the last page of the scrapbook, words of warning from General Hap Arnold. Looking toward the future, he said,
Most important of all, we will need an ably staffed, adequately financed, and properly equipped research and development program. I say most important of all because if we fail to keep not merely abreast, but ahead of technological development, we needn't bother to train any force, and we needn't make plans for emergency expansion. We will be totally defeated before any expansion could take place. All this is expensive, of course, but it is one expense that we cannot now or ever skimp or stint. It is the price of security and the price of peace.